While we wait for Indira, I'll just get started to introduce you all to the meetup today. So if you did not know, you are attending our first European event for Accessibility Virtual Reality Group. So we started this meetup a few months ago. And what we do with this meetup is to seek to understand how VR experiences occur in what we would call social VR. We want to gather feedback from the community by doing real world events and learning from the community what are the best practices to make an event inclusive or accessible. So anytime you have a positive or negative experience at our event, we want your feedback, and we are seeking to learn how to make sure that people with disabilities are included in social VR experiences. And so for today, our goal is to have our first presentation that works better for a European time zone. And our plan is to start having this event that you're attending today monthly. So every month, the second Thursday of the month, the first Thursday of the month, we're planning to have a meetup in virtual reality, for now, Mozilla Hubs, that people can join and meet each other and learn from each other. We do have bigger plans of trying out other social VR platforms, but one of the reasons that we really support Mozilla Hubs is that we have been able to demonstrate having the closed captions, or the captions that you see displayed in our room. Those captions are supplied by Mirror by Night from White Coat Captioning. And so we always advocate for having a real captioner for your event. And we're happy that in Mozilla Hubs, we can display captions for an event. My name is Thomas Logan, and I have a company, Equal Entry, and we work on making sure that technology is accessible for everyone. And so one of our goals from doing this meetup is to make sure that anything we learn from you all that come to one of our events, we will try to report to Mozilla Hubs, or maybe a different application in the future. We also want to acknowledge and say thank you to Jolly McPhee from the Internet Society Accessibility Special Interest Group. So every time we do one of our events, whether we do this in person or we do this in virtual reality, we stream the event to YouTube. So if you ever have trouble hearing us inside of this virtual world, we also have a link on our website or on our meetup page to listen to our event from YouTube. And that's been something that we have sought to have even before virtual reality. We just always believe that people should not have to physically attend an event to participate or ask questions. With all that being said, I'm just going to check if Indira, are you back in the room? Yes, yep, I see Indira. Okay, great. So,
yeah.
So Indira, I want to introduce now Indira Knight. We're very happy to have Indira Knight here with us today from the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Design, the Royal College of Art in London. We have heard presentations from Indira before at our events in New York City, and we learned quite a bit. And we're really excited to have her present about designing a participatory design workshop here in our hub space today. We are going to be trying some interactive functionality inside of Mozilla Hubs as part of her presentation. And please take my opening statements if there's something that's not accessible for you, or if you have difficulty participating, we want that feedback and we want to collect that. We're always trying new ideas in this world, and we want to make sure that if there are barriers or issues, please give us that feedback, and we will work with Mozilla on addressing those. So with all that being said, now I'll introduce Indira Knight and take it away.
Hi, my name's Indira, and I work at the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Design at the Royal College of Art. And I'm also actually a Mozilla tech speaker, so I often give talks about web VR and Arduino. And I wanted to talk today about designing a participatory design workshop. About 2 years ago, I started on a project called gameChange, which is, if I can click in here, which is a virtual reality therapy for people with psychosis to help them feel more confident in everyday situations. And a really important part of this was the participatory design, the co-designing with people with lived experience of psychosis. So I want to talk a bit about how that worked today. And I also thought it might be quite nice, as it's in VR and we can move around a space, is to go through one of the workshops. So part of the co-design, we ran workshops around the UK with people with lived experience of psychosis. So I thought today it might be quite nice to just go through some of the workshop, how I designed the workshop, how it was maybe different from other workshops I designed, and then sort of do almost like a role play of that workshop. So just to go a bit about the project, this slide shows the people who were involved in the project. So we got funded by the National Institute of Health Research. I think it was about £4 million. And the University of Oxford psychologists from there were heading this. So they've done work in virtual reality before for different mental health conditions and worked with people with psychosis. So they were leading it. They created a spin-off company called Oxford VR to build the VR. And we worked also closely with a company called a foundation called the McPin Foundation. So they work with people with mental health issues to make sure they're involved in the research into that mental health. So with this, they set up a lived experience advisory panel, and they're still meeting because this project at the moment is in its second year. It's just starting the third year. So in the first year, it was the design and development of the project, and then the VR was actually built, and it's now in clinical trial, 432 people in England, to see if the virtual reality can help. I'll go in more into what the virtual reality is when I go into the bit of that's the actual workshop, but I have to sort of say, so it is a standalone therapy, and people are in different environments that they can try out and see if they can use different methods to control their anxiety. So I don't know if people know what psychosis is. I just thought I'd put a brief sort of definition. It's a mental health problem that causes people to perceive or interpret things differently from those around them. This might involve hallucinations or delusions. And psychosis often leads to social isolation. People feel anxious and worried about going outside for a number of reasons that, and they use, and this makes them socially isolated, which then can cause other health problems as well. So it can sort of be the sort of spiral. And I just wanted to show this slide. This is a really rough idea of how the project was set up. So in the first year, where I was heavily involved, was the design of the project, the design of the virtual reality and the building of the virtual reality. And as I say, Oxford VR built it, but we worked with people with lived experience psychosis in the design. And workshops was one part of that. We also had design sessions where we worked with people with lived experience, plus the psychologists and the developers and the designers ourselves. And we met almost weekly over a number of months. And that was a chance for people to put ideas together, to quickly find out if things worked or not, get feedback between all the parties. So, for example, if we had one idea where there were someone in the virtual reality be catching balloons, but because we had the developers there, they could tell us that actually catching balloons is quite a difficult thing to do in virtual reality to make sure the physics is right. So we knew sort of straight away that wouldn't work. So it was really good having that sort of quick feedback. We had the lived experience advisory panel that's set up by the McPin Foundation, and they they're still meeting. They meet a number of times each year, And in the first meeting, they helped us design the scenarios, the different environments that would be in the VR. They sort of said which ones were most important. And we could also go to them remotely. We could go to them remotely as well and ask them questions. And they also helped us set up the workshops. So it's actually the workshops that I wanted to talk about today, was about how we went around designing the workshops. As I said, we had in the end, 7 workshops with people with lived experience of psychosis. The reason these were slightly different from the other sessions was these really were any idea was taken seriously. There wasn't any no's. It's not like, oh, we can't do that in VR. Oh, no, that's not the psychology behind that. This was people's thoughts and views and the way they wanted it designed. So we could really get, theirs was the people with psychosis, theirs was the main voice in these sessions. And at the start of designing, one of the first things we did was we talked to the psychologists, we talked to them at PM Foundation, and we talked to the developers, because we were all facilitators together in the workshop. And we did have quite a lot of facilitators in the workshop. And we always made sure we had psychologists there, because some of the things that people might experience, because everyone did try VR, they didn't have to, but everyone did try VR. It could cause anxiety, it could, so we always made sure we had psychologists there who work with people who have psychosis. And we also made sure that there was space outside the main area that people could go to if they need to break, as well as enough space in the room that they could bring support workers with them, or they could bring or family members if they wanted to. So we wanted to make sure this was a really safe space, that people could say what they want. If they didn't want to say anything, that was fine. If they wanted, we had enough facilitators that if they wanted to talk to a facilitator and they could speak for them or write something down for them and express their views, that was available. So it really sort of, people could get involved. I don't know if you can see this on the screen in VR, but this was the I wanted to talk through today the second workshop we did. So in the second workshop, we had a series of aims, and I suppose this is how anyone starts the design of any workshop. You work out what your aims are and what it is you want to find out. And again, this was often done by talking to the psychologists and also talking to developers to see what they needed to be able to develop. And it also, we looked at previous workshops. So we always looked at previous workshops and feedback from the LEAP and the design sessions to sort of decide what is it we need to know at this point. So at this particular workshop, we were looking at a number of things. There were some questions. The therapy is inside VR. Everything takes place inside VR. So it is standalone, and there's a virtual coach that walks you through and helps you decide which scenario you want to go into and gives any advice and gives support. And we were looking at how that coach should look. We'd done some previous work on what people thought would make a good coach. And now we're looking at if the coach had to be a freestanding person who was fully in the scene. So, you know, full body, you could interact with that person, or if people would be happy with the person being inside a screen. So either a phone would come up and the coach would be there to give support, or an iPad or something like that. We also were asked to check if people would mind having audio. So that was one of the things we looked at. The other thing we're looking at is, though it didn't actually make it into the VR, but elements did, we were looking at having a space at the end that people could relax in, somewhere they could go to sort of unwind before taking the headset off. So this, we were looking at what people found relaxing, and this we did over a number of sessions. So that was one of the things we were looking at. And the last one was the overall flow. So when someone comes into VR, how does it feel? Where do they go? How do they choose a room to go to? What feels good in VR, what doesn't? So we sort of had those aims at the beginning. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is just part of, then I write an agenda. So I just made an agenda of what we'd be doing, what the activity would be, what the materials that I needed to create would be. And I think most of the time I over-created materials. I had a lot more materials than I needed. And this meant there could be flexibility in the workshop, because some things worked and some things didn't, and you couldn't always tell until you got there. You wouldn't necessarily know the space you were in until you got there. So I sort of over-designed in a way and had lots of materials that I could use if needed. So once that was all set up, we then went to the different places in England. And from this point, this is actually the bit where I want it to be. I want to give you a taste of what the workshop was like. So the following slides are all from the workshop. So this is how we would come into the space. We'd all sit around in a group. We'd all introduce ourselves, we'd introduce the project, and we'd normally then at some point, either before or during it, have lunch together. So we'd sit and have lunch and chat. So that was that. But I thought I'd just give you an idea of what the workshop was. So I'd start the workshop by introducing the Royal College of Art, because the Royal College of Art, it's a postgraduate college of art and design, where people do masters and PhDs, but we also do research, particularly in design. And the Helen Hamlyn Centre, where I work, is involved very much in people-centered design. So we work with people who will be using the product, whatever we're making, to help in the design process. And that's a very important part of it for us. And that's why we're sort of running the workshop today. And we were brought into the project to work with people. So then I would just introduce the agenda, that we'd do introductions. So we'd have an introduction to the project, into VR and each other. And then there would be lunch, followed by looking at the coach avatar, looking at the end of session, how the relaxation is, and looking at user engagement, how to keep people engaged and how the flow could help with that. So just actually turn so I can see this a bit better on the screen. So the VR therapy itself, as I said, it's a totally enclosed therapy, so it's standalone, but there would always be a peer support worker with the person in it. And as it's self-contained, there's a virtual coach that I said who helps people through that. And then it will contain 6 scenarios. So these are virtual environments that are sort of everyday environments. So they're a pub, a cafe, a street, a bus, a GP's waiting room, and a corner shop. And within each of these scenarios, there will be 5 different tasks that people have to do. And these tasks they get increasingly harder, not in they're harder to do, but they're harder to stay in that situation. So in the pub, for example, it starts off and you're in the pub and it's fairly quiet and you're standing there and you have to wait for someone to arrive. And then in the next level, you're doing the same thing, but this time there's more people in the pub, there's more noise. And then at one point, there's a football fan who will walk over to you and ask you to where the toilet is. So you actually have to interact with someone that people might find causes anxiety. The sessions themselves, when people are in the therapy sessions, we imagine they'd be about 30 minutes long. And the environments themselves, these are sort of images that we did actually show at the workshop, because at that point we didn't have the virtual environments built, they're still being designed. But they were very much everyday environments. We wanted to make sure they're not London-centric. So I want to make sure that they're places that people recognise. So it's a general coffee shop. It's a coffee shop like you'd go in on a high street. The street, again, is a very generalised street. It's not old, it's not new. It's sort of a general place where people live. It's not run down, but it's not really posh either. It's sort of that middle sort of environment. And the bus would be a single-decker bus, partly because we didn't want the element of stairs coming in, because people would be able to go upstairs, sort of keep it on that level. The pub, again, a general pub that is on every high street. And with the GP's waiting room, there was a decision there that there would be glass in front of the receptionist, just to make it feel it's a bit harder to deal with. It's a bit harder being in there. And again, it was a corner shop, so it's just a shop that people go in every day. And the therapy is everyday situations, and it's to help people evaluate the accuracy of their fears of being in that situation. There are things called defense behaviors that people have to get through those situations if they have to go into them. So a lot of people wouldn't go in the situation in the first place, but if they have to, they might only go at certain times of day, or they might rush through very quickly to make sure they're out as quickly as possible, not looking at anyone, maybe wearing a hat or glasses. So this is to evaluate doing something differently and seeing if that makes you feel less anxious, and sort of see if the accuracy of the fears, and by doing something, if you can sort of lower those fears and realize that outside the general world is a safe enough place to be in. And what we're looking at today is people keeping presence in VR. So once they're in that environment, they really feel that they're there. How can we achieve that? The engagement, that people feel engaged in the process, and that it's easy to use, so that people feel that they can easily know what they need to do, and the technology isn't hindering them. And so then it gives sort of an idea of what the session is about, to develop ideas for the end session, to find out how people feel. They're presented in different ways, and how the flow of the application could be made better. So those are the workshop aims. And these were, I say, this is a slide from the workshop. So this is what people saw in the introduction. And then we got onto the workshop activities, and that's something I'd like to try today. I mean, I know we're not in a workshop and we haven't got Post-it notes and things like that, but I have put around this room, you can see a number of different things. So in this, everyone got the chance to try virtual reality, and everyone actually did. So I've put over towards the balcony just a clip of some of the virtual reality they would have seen during this session. So in this session, we didn't have any actual work from the developers because they're still working on that. So we created, a colleague of mine, Paul, created some prototypes. So up near the balcony, I've just got some film that you could press play and you can watch to get an idea of what people would have seen. Then over sort of opposite where the balcony is, there is a worksheet which has the images of the coach, and for you to say strengths and weaknesses of a full-length coach, of it being in a box and voice only. And then going to the other side of that, there are some images of places to get ideas of whether people find those relaxing or not. And then there's also the example of the worksheet that I created for that, and also the questionnaire I created for that as well, to get an idea of what people find relaxing. So what I did again in this, it would have been Post-its in the actual workshop. People put on their Post-its of what they found caused anxiety with those images and what they found relaxing within those images. And then outside on the balcony is a flow diagram, which I think I can show it through here. So yeah, so they're the two the coach pictures, the environment, and then there was a flow diagram. So this is a flow diagram of the actual the application of when people come in, what they see, what sort of branching there is at different points of it. And out on the balcony is a worksheet which looks at the ways that people might want to interact, what would make them want to stay in that space. Today we are hoping that you can go around and have sort of 10 minutes to look at these. So imagine that you're in the workshop and you're doing these workshop activities. Because we don't have Post-its, we're hoping you'd be able to draw on these. We seem to have a problem with the pen. I think maybe Thomas went through that. And so I don't know if you explain what we thought instead is just go into the object, so the little wand, and find an object that you feel relates your feeling about that. So for the images, maybe go over, and if there's an area that you find makes you feel anxious, put some sort of image that you feel represents that. Or if you think there's something that's nice, something that represents that. And so, because in the workshop, we did get people to split into groups and do things separately. So I thought it'd be nice just to spend 10 minutes to have a look around, have a look at the workshop materials, and then just try filling them in with the means we have in VR at the moment. So I don't know if, Thomas, you want to add anything on how people can do that, or if you've explained.
Yeah. So if you all can hear me, like, I think this is our exciting experiment. I'm really excited Indira wants to make this interactive. So unfortunately,
I can't hear you, Thomas. You're very muffled.
should be a way we could mark things is not working, but I do believe.
Yeah, me too. I can't hear you.
If you use the wand icon, which is the pink icon,
Yeah.
you can actually choose objects to insert.
Yeah, so that if people want to use the wand icon, yeah, to choose the objects, and if people want to go and have a look around now, and then we'll join back here in
and we'll help you.
in a few minutes,
We'll help you.
and
yeah, we'll take 10 minutes. We'll help you.
yeah, and have a look around, and then we come back and I can sort of tell you what the reaction were to these during the workshop and what worked and what didn't.
All right, I'm going to go over to this first wall with strengths and weaknesses, but we do have multiple walls.
Yeah, I'm going to go over to the scene wall. So if anyone wants to come there and have a look at that. I'm just going to go and have a look at the video. So this is a prototype video that people would have been inside in VR. I'll just have a look outside on the balcony. In the balcony space, people could again put post-its in. We had these up as A4 sheets on the wall. So the therapy room starter session, intro to the scene, the pause, end of session. And we asked people what they'd want to happen in this space, what would make them want to go back. So it's sort of get an idea of how it could look.
So I put a couple objects over here. But this is all an experiment for me.
Mm-hmm. Hello?
Thank you. Yeah, so I thought what was interesting for me about this exercise would, if I was using avatars to communicate my feedback, I need to make this in my fully page avatar. I wanted to say it would be select at the clock. Yeah, but if I had like words or ways to communicate, like other words, pick an object that I thought communicated that idea. So I put a clock to be like it was slow. And then I put a barn that was sturdy to be strength, just to say that I liked it.
Let's go and have a look at the last wall.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I went back on my desktop because I stopped being able to hear on my.
Yeah, you're clearer now as well.
Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to add that, like, I think, like, I love this idea. The writing wand should be working in Mozilla Hubs, which we were thinking maybe like to be able to tick or like put something underneath the strengths or weaknesses. But I thought it was a cool idea to add.
I'm back out on the sea. Oh no. I'm back.
Hello.
Oh.
Hello.
Oh, you're out.
Welcome back.
Oh, hello. Sorry.
We can guide you back.
This is utterly bizarre. Sorry, guys. I didn't realize my mic was over.
There's a strange feeling when you end up over the water and it's just there.
Yes,
It's interesting. It's quite interesting though. I quite like it.
Right. I just thought everyone was standing there looking at me, and I was like stuck out in the lake. My keyboard went all wonky as well.
Oh no, we didn't see you at all.
Yeah.
We didn't notice.
Anyway,
you're there.
Nice to hear you, Indira. Sorry, Thomas. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for being here. No, and like we said, this is all an experiment. So I was really happy that Indira wanted to do this because we're trying to learn how to use these environments and then, you know, participate. So we want your feedback, and like I already have feedback from what I was trying to do, but I thought it was really interesting to be able to use the space. Like we don't want to just have people come here and watch a presentation. We want to do interactivity, and like we want to figure out how to do that. So I'm excited.
Great stuff. Will do. I will comment for sure on the whole thing after. Yep.
Great.
So I think I'll go
Does
back.
So
anyone
are we
wanna,
looking at this
like,
wall, or are we looking at
like, do we
specific?
want to like? Do you want to like go back to your presentation, or do
Yeah,
you want to?
I can go back
and
to the
then we'll-
presentation, and then people can always come and have a look at these after. So it's basically to say you could have a look and see, get an idea of what it was like to be in that workshop. Because then I wanted to quickly talk about sort of what worked and what didn't, and what I learned. Because what I found, because in a way we had the luxury of running 7 workshops, I learned a lot over that time on what worked and what didn't. And this that you're seeing now that was out on the balcony didn't work. So it's interesting. I had actually planned to have this worksheet with it to get people to really think about what would be in each part of it. It was done, I think partly it was done at the end of the day. So it was quite a long afternoon. People were tired. And it's also, I realized that I'd been thinking about the flow a lot. You know, you're designing a VR application, you're thinking about where people come in, where people branch off to a different environment, how they choose the environment, how they might pause it. But it's something that's quite abstract if you haven't been thinking about it for a while. So I think that didn't help. And the fact that by the end of the day, everyone was tired. So initially what I wanted to do was people to have a brainstorm exactly like the one on the balcony. So they would see that and they would put ideas, and then work in pairs to come up with how that actually might work, and then fill out another worksheet. But in the end, though I say it didn't work how I planned, but people did come up with ideas for the one on the balcony. They did put things on Post-its on walls, and some really good ideas came out of it, particularly around the pause and what it might be like. So the idea with the pause was if you're really anxious in VR, instead of taking the headset off and coming back to your action environment, you still stay in virtual reality. And again, they weren't used in the therapy in the end, but it was just interesting to see some of the ideas that people came up with to do that, and whether it's something that just freezes the environment, so you're still in the same environment, but everything stops, whether sound comes down slowly, or whether it goes to complete darkness and you sort of get sort of like this complete break from what you're seeing. So while the workshop activity didn't work, some good ideas came out of it and made me realize again how I needed to maybe develop the material slightly differently. But the other two work quite well. So looking at the spaces that made people feel anxious or calm worked. So I think next time I did it, I thought about the pictures I'd chosen, and especially from the comments coming back, added different would make different pictures, or I wanted to make different pictures, and in other ways we talked about different environments. But this, with people putting up Post-its on what they find relaxing or not, gave really good feedback into things that I would find relaxing, other people might find would make them feel vulnerable, particularly if the space was too open, or there could be people hiding behind things. And then this worksheet worked well, just to find out a general view on what relaxing environments would have in them, the colours, people getting to draw them. That worked really well. And again, though we didn't have an end space that people could relax in, a lot of the work we did on this did influence the coach's room. So when someone first comes into the environment, they go into a room that's different from all the other environments, where the coach can introduce them and into the therapy and get them to choose a scenario. And at the end, they come back to that environment, so the coach can sort of have a, you know, how did that go? How are you feeling now? Think about what you've learned through this. And that did, from these workshops, that did influence what that environment looked like. And again, with the coach was very interesting. Go back to the coach, because we went for a full-bodied coach who is there. And while some people did like the idea of a coach in some sort of technology, in a phone or in an iPad shaped thing, most people preferred that person was there with them. And so that's what we went with. So that was really useful to know. And the Leap went on to help with the general design of the coach in other sessions. So really my conclusions from running this workshops and running the whole lot of them is how important it was to take from one to the next. And as I said before, to keep to be able to keep it really flexible. So the design, while they were always very set aims, and I tried to have everything quite organized for the day, I would definitely be very flexible in how it was delivered. And if something wasn't working, on the spot, come up with a different way of doing it. So the one that's on the balcony of the flows, when I realized that the idea of get people pairing off didn't work, we actually just had a general conversation with people who still felt like being in that conversation and discuss their ideas. So it became far more just an informal chat after the brainstorming. And throughout all the workshops, I kept them in this way. I would often change how an activity was run to make sure that people could get involved as much as they could. The importance of having that safe space, that people feel they can leave at any time, that they know who everyone in the room is, to make sure that we've explained our roles properly and why we're there. And again, yes, Jen will just take the feedback, and we always had a sort of general feedback wall for VR, and people could write notes on what they thought of VR. So it's just having lots of different ways that people could communicate with us. If they didn't want to speak, have the writing. If they didn't feel comfortable writing, have someone to talk to, so that people could get involved throughout. And that's the end of my presentation. So I don't know if people have any questions. If you want more information on the project, that's the website and the Twitter handle. As I say, it's sort of starting the third year soon. The clinical trials, I assume, will be getting close to the end. I'm not sure how the lockdown has affected those. But the aim is that if it works and it gets through clinical trials, this would be used in the NHS. So the final bit of the work being done would look at how this could be used, the sort of the economy of this being used in the NHS, and how to get it delivered in the NHS. So if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you, Indira, so much for the presentation today, and again for working with us in this new environment. I guess my first question would be, just from doing a user study, or like some of the things that we see in the room, like where did you see most of the post-it notes, or where did you see, like when you did this test in the real world, like what kind of feedback did you get for strengths and weaknesses?
The strengths and weaknesses. So the strength for a full-bodied coach is that there is someone there with you, and you feel that it's almost emulating somebody going out with you into the real world, and you feel that support. Whereas if it was called up on a phone, it would just feel a bit too remote, and it looked a bit funny that someone was cut off. The audio, we actually knew before we asked that it wouldn't. We guessed it wouldn't work. I wouldn't say we knew it because we hadn't asked people. We guessed it wouldn't work because one of the symptoms of psychosis is hearing voices and having voices in your head. So actually having a disembodied voice as a coach, we felt wouldn't work, but we wanted to ask to see and find out. And that was the general view. Yes, it wouldn't work. There were some comments that people quite liked having a coach maybe in a mobile thing, that they felt more in control, that they could bring that person in and out when they wanted to. But the overwhelming response was that it felt more natural to have a full-bodied person there. So that actually then became, so it really did influence the final outcome because we did get a full-bodied coach.
Thank you.
And definitely with the relaxation, it helped in finding that end space and the coach designing the coach's room. If anyone else has any questions.
Hello there. Does anyone out there have any questions?
Well, then thank you for coming today. This is the first time I've half presented in VR. I started in VR and then came to the laptop. It's been interesting to develop a talk for this, and I love this project. So it's always good to be able to sort of talk about it. So thank you for coming today.
Great. And then I will just say thank you again to Indira for being our first presenter for our European version of this event. And we will host a discussion after the event. And so anyone that wants to stay around and network, that's something that should be cool in social VR, and we want to encourage that. We do want to say thank you to our sponsors from Equal Entry and White Coat Captioning and Internet Society. We appreciate being able to pull together what we currently feel is an accessible event. But if you have feedback for us, as we mentioned, we were really trying something cool and new with Indira tonight, and we want your feedback because I loved that we were using VR in Indira's presentation in an innovative way. We will have our next presentation on June 18th. It will be in an American time zone, and it will be with Bill Curtis Davidson, who most recently was in charge of developing a accessible organization for Magic Leap. So we will continue to host this event every 2 weeks, but depending on where you live in the world, you may only want to join us monthly. And we appreciate everyone joining us today. And we really want to give a round of applause to Indira. And if you want to actually applause, I think you can type the number 1 in your keyboard, and that will give at least a smiley face into the world, and you can show Indira that you appreciate her day. So yes, thank you. And then now we'll just meet everyone, and thank you everyone for coming today. All right.
Thank you.